When it comes to government jobs, making sure the hiring process is fair is, well, everything. There's a whole framework for this called the roster system, and it's designed to guarantee just that. But a recent government order, G.O. 77, has just completely turned that system on its head. So let's dive in and decode what actually changed.
And that really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? You've got thousands of people applying for jobs from all sorts of backgrounds. How on earth do you make sure every single person gets a fair shot? That's exactly the puzzle the roster system was built to solve.
Okay, so think of it like this. For every 100 jobs that open up, there's a kind of master list. Each spot on that list from 1 to 100 is called a roster point. The whole idea is to use these points to spread the opportunities around to different communities and categories. But the way it does that, well, that just got a massive overhaul. To really get what's new, we've got to take a step back and look at the old way of doing things. For years, the system was all about having fixed or earmarked seats. So under the old rules, things were pretty rigid. Certain roster points were permanently locked in for very specific groups. For example, OCW means a woman from the open competition category, and SCW is a woman from the scheduled cast category. As you can see here, roster point 1 was always for an OC woman, and point 2 was always for an SC woman. Yeah, these were literally set in stone. What this meant in the real world was if a hiring process got to the 6th available job, that job had to go to a person with a visual disability from the open competition group. No ifs, ands, or buts. And if nobody who was qualified was available, well, that job might just sit empty for a while. The point itself was totally inflexible.
And this is where everything changes. Enter a government order known as G.O. 77. This one document completely flipped the script on the entire philosophy of the roster system.
This slide really nails the core difference. Before, you can think of a roster point as a reserved parking spot. It was always there for one specific person. After G.O. 77, it's more like a traffic checkpoint. The system doesn't say, this job is reserved for Group X anymore. Instead, it says, okay, we're at this point, let's stop and check if Group X has enough people. If not, the next qualified person from that group gets the spot. It's a huge shift from reserving a spot to simply verifying if a group is represented. All right, so this all sounds good in theory, but what does an adequacy check actually look like in practice? Let's break it down. So now, the whole system is much more fluid. The recruiters go down the list of 100 points, and when they hit a certain checkpoint for a specific group, let's say women, they basically hit pause. They ask a simple question, have we hired enough women to meet the quota? If the answer is no, boom, that spot goes to the next qualified woman. If the answer is yes, then the spot is just filled on general merit, and they move on to the next checkpoint. And here's a perfect example of that in action. For women in the open competition category, all these roster points you see here are no longer automatically their jobs. Instead, these are just the moments where the system stops the check if their representation is adequate. You can see how this creates a ton more flexibility in the hiring process, right? Okay, so that's the theory, but let's get to the important part. What does this actually mean for the people applying for these jobs? What's the real-world impact here? And believe me, the scale of this change is huge. Across all the different categories, a total of 30 roster points that used to be permanently fixed for women have now been switched over to these flexible adequacy checkpoints. That one number, 30, tells you just how big of a deal this policy shift really is. Now, this next one is one of the most significant changes, especially for persons with disabilities, or PWD. It used to be that the special roster points for PWD were often tied only to the open competition category. But now, a PWD candidate can come from any social category. Scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, backward class, you name it. I mean, this just blows the doors wide open for so many more candidates and makes the whole system way more inclusive. And it's not just for PWD. We're seeing similar shifts for other groups as well. The roster points for ex-servicemen and for meritorious sports persons have been moved mostly toward the end of the 100-point cycle, and they've also been converted to this adequacy check model. Again, it's all about adding more flexibility. But, these things are never a simple flip of a switch. And here's a really fascinating real-world wrinkle we found in the source document. This quote basically reveals that some recent job announcements actually went out using the old fixed point system. Why? Because they were written up before G.O. 77 officially came out. It just goes to show you that moving from the old way to the new way is a pretty complex, ongoing process. So, when you boil it all down, what we're looking at is a complete redesign of the system. It's moved away from these permanent reserved slots and toward a much more dynamic model of checks and balances. The goal is still the same, fair representation, but the method has totally evolved. And it really makes you wonder, is this shift from rigid, fixed rules to these flexible checks, is this the future of how we ensure fairness in public service?